Hello, everyone. I'm very glad you joined me today during this hour. My name is Julia. I started my work in game dev, but also at Techland in 2018. And that journey started off as a QA specialist, but then I became the producer and finished by the very serious producer who finished off Dying Light 2. And now I'm working on the unannounced project, AAA Open World. However, this presentation isn't about me. It's about how to plan in the wind of change. So this is a very short agenda for today's presentation. So first is, why did I choose this topic? Then I will talk about something that is equally important in building a home and building a project, that is pipelines. Then a short scene, like a short story, let's make a fictional game and what can go wrong. Then how to deal with changes, and this will be mostly for the producers, for the leaders, for the people who work with the plans. And then a few development stories from the production of Dying Light 2 Stay Human. So, if you work in game dev, or maybe you are a gamer, most probably you've seen such articles in the media. So the games are being changed, and if you were waiting for something for your console, it turns out that it won't launch on this console because it was moved for the new generation. Also, the games get delayed, and the games get delayed very often, and there are very little games that go on the first date that was announced. Another thing is the trailers. Often you watch the trailer from the very first stages of production. You get hyped so much because the trailer is awesome. And then it turns out that the game kind of goes into a different direction. Maybe that's because when the trailer was done, there was a totally different idea for the game than the game that already launched. And there is something called a development hell. And development hell is going into loops all over again, starting the project, going to the middle, then resetting, and so on. And there are many games on the market which development cycles took time that could really make 3 games released. So starting to think about the changes, George Bernard Shaw once said a wonderful quote which refers to the personal growth, but may even be used in terms of the project development. Progress is impossible without change. And if you are creative people, or if you know the artists, if you do some new things, you know this process of iteration, like new final, screw it, it's a final. But you're not the only one. Even the great writers, even the great artists of all times changed their ideas all the time, thus creating more work for them. So to understand how to approach these changes and how to make dealing with changes kind of easier, you need the pipelines. And yeah, you need to just have the pipelines. But what is important is to know what kind of pipelines, how to create them, and most importantly, everyone should know how they work, and everyone in the team should respect those. So if you've attended my presentation last year on Digital Dragons, I was talking about the quality in art and how to produce it. And I showed this, which is an example that is not absolutely from the production, we have NDAs, but this is just an example of the art pipeline. And not only the concept art, not only the level art, but also the dependencies, how to understand what stage it is, how to have the stage approved, what needs to be done, and who should do that. This is important to have such pipelines with maybe even big detail for every team, for every feature, for every component. But remember, you don't have to go throughout the game from the beginning till the end, because usually you go with prioritization. And let's say this horse is your priority backlog. So P0, the best quality first, goes to main quest, main line, main mechanics, anything that is the main pillar of your game. Then you may think about the epilogue and think about what feeling would you like to leave your player with, because usually when people finish the game, these last seconds are the most important. The side content can be designed. You may know what it will be. Like we see, this will be something with a face. We can assume it will be a horse. But you just know it will be there. You have the plan, you have the time logs, but no great details. And about the prologue, well, you will have the prologue. Before you have all the features, before you have all the story, all the content, you cannot really create a proper tutorialization and proper entrance to your story. So this is the time for the story time. The pipeline skipper. This is a tale about skipping the pipelines and what were the results. And of course, any resemblance to reality is pure coincidence, and this is absolutely from imagination. You have to do a military outpost story. Like there is an open world activity, player can go there all the time, and you have a task to prepare the environment for this outpost, and then prepare the fight, some boss fight with good loot, some bandits, just something that can be reused, placed all over the maps. Everyone knows bandit camps in the games, especially open world. And the team gives you this estimation. It goes over a month, and in your company, the milestones last for a month. So if the development, and only the development without the testing, takes 34 days, then you will not be able to reach the milestone with this effect. But you are an ambitious producer. You know that you have to deliver. So you talk with the team, and why do I need a sketch? Everyone's painting, like, what is the sense in sketching? You know what you have to do, the military outpost. This isn't something fantasy, something out of your mind. You can go already with the executive concept art because the team must know what to do. And 3 days for your placements of the assets, you wouldn't need to do that if you didn't work on some dummy boxes or gray boxes, but if you had the 3D assets to already put, so why not? And way to polish the boss fight. The first fight you'll set up will be awesome, because there's no need to spend 2 days, and suddenly these are 27 days, and absolutely you can fit into 30 days milestone. So your concept artists prepare this wonderful executive concept art. You can see this is military area, keep out. So yeah, you know what it is. You can jump and climb here. You see clearly the entrance to the military outpost. You see a tower and some shooters maybe standing there. Perfect. So when you have that, 3D artists start working on this, take the measurements out of it, start preparing beautiful textured assets, and the LDs, while getting these assets, are building exactly this wall. But then it goes to review and tests. And after you have that built, after those 27 days, it turns out that the space is too small for a combat. The combat is not very engaging. You need more ambushes. You need better visibility of the bandits you're fighting with. And actually, the geometry isn't that good. There are lots of Z fights. The nav mesh is not working. And actually, the modules are different, and player is unable to jump where we planned to jump. So in that case, you've lost 27 days. Your team has a very big backlog to fix, and at that point, sometimes it's better to forget about those 88 bugs and 40 issues and start the proper process, the proper pipeline. So you start with the sketches, and you have to answer what is important in the military outpost. It's the experience of the player. So the player must know what to expect when going to that direction, so just doesn't get killed. So first, you work with the silhouettes, with something that player will recognize as, okay, this is the challenge, but it's also the good reward. After that, you do a pass of metrics. Just make sure that everything is reachable by the player, uses the animations that we have. Especially in the games like Techland does, almost all of the time, we concentrate on making the player reach every space the player can see. So we have to build all our environments in proper metrics and using player skills. So if we are adding next content, there are already a set of rules that need to be followed to prepare new environments. Only after that we can start, after, of course, all of that is approved, and every team, not only the art teams, but also the gameplay team, the quest team, the open world team, the tech team, understand it and know it and approve it, we can go to the final concept stage, but also not doing the full location, but rather preparing the modules. Because if we are doing an open world game, if we want to have multiple of those camps in a game, we need to think modular. Prepare 2 assets, 3 assets that's replaced or rotated or placed somewhere in another place. Looks like the different kind of activity, but is still recognizable. It isn't copied one from another, has its own style, but is very cheap in terms of the memory, of the production, of the disk space, which is also currently a problem, even in the current gen. But anyway, only if you are prepared and you have all of that, and you have the level in blockouts, you have the combats tested, and everything is approved, you may go with building the full environment. And to make this process possible, you need the proper review pipeline. This is something different than the team pipeline or the assets or features pipeline. This is about what should be seen by whom and whose approval leads to showing it to another step. And this is only the example, because usually when you try to adapt the book review process or the rules, it may not be in sync with your company. So when creating the review pipeline in your own project, you need to find out how big of your team you have. What is the specialty or seniority level in your team? Who sees it and how often? Because, for example, you might have a director that needs to see every little tiny bit. And although this is a full team director, just wants to see task by task. And sometimes it's better to include that into that director's plan, because director is also an employee. If you know your director wants to look at all the different small stuff, it's sometimes very clever to put it into their plan and also put the reviews and writing guidelines and feedbacking teams and going into meetings also in their plan, so they also find out that their time of the day exceeds 8 hours. Because that way it's much easier to convince them to pack the tasks and review the features or the full content packs rather than tasks than just telling them no. Just believe me, telling no to a director never works. So, is this the end of the pipelines topic? Of course not, because there are lots of different pipelines you should have written, everyone should know them, everyone should understand them, and everyone should treat it as the Polish constitution. So, there are pipeline of teams, there are pipelines of deliverables, just the single one, like the single feature, single location, single scene, but also the more complicated pipelines like the quest, open world, or other deliverables that need multidisciplinary teams. And what is also helpful is when all of your team, everyone who is doing that, knows exactly the company and the team structure, who is responsible for what, who has the final say on what, and also the dependency scheme. So I prepare something, who should I contact, who should review it, who will use it in their further work. So now, let's try to make a game. First, you start off with the very early stages of production, from just the initial designs, the pre-production, early production, just to have this feature-complete project. And usually the beginning are changes, changes, changes. What game are we doing? Will it be single player, or will we be doing some multi or very multi? What will be the camera perspective? What will be the setting of our game? Like very high level questions. And is it a problem where the changes occur in that step? Of course not. This is the research. And after long discussions, you usually have a very ambitious project. You do a game of your dreams. Who wouldn't like to do a game they wanted to play? Of course, you have this design. However, then, if you forget about the budget, team size, the know-how, the seniority of your team, also the time you got, the technology that you have and you may work on, and many other aspects, even the publisher's needs from your team, it may turn out that you need to just make your needs much smaller. Because doing a finished project and working is much more important than trying to develop the ideal project that won't ever be launched. But let's say you've done everything according to plan and you have it, the game design doc, the main pillars of the game you want to do, and up from that point, these high-level stuff cannot change. Because any change in the high-level pillars just takes lots of dependencies, and you may find out that at some point you have the whole project to change. And during the early project stages, you usually create some first levels, but only in a very blocky stage. You introduce the mechanics, you check these mechanics, you make sure that they are good enough. You are testing and you verify all the features, because the later you introduce tests, the better quality will be your game. Also, you work on some balance for the game, for the mechanics not to be too difficult, too easy, or just according to the plans. Establish some metrics, and what the art teams can do when they have nothing to do, they are looking for references, they are creating mood arts. Also, the gameplay teams can look for references in other games, trying to do some backwards engineering or listening to the developers talking about their projects just to find some very good ideas. And the main process in that stage is the research and development. And this is the full-on cycle that goes on and on and on. You imagine something, you test it, you put it on the level, you integrate it, it works perfectly, it is approved, but then there is a news. For example, we're cutting that off, this doesn't fit to our game, we have a new technology, it can be done better, so usually then you go to the beginning of that circle. But at that point, this isn't anything pathological unless you don't go back to something that is already established. And just imagine the game production as the Jenga tower. You have to have the very solid base, and if you change anything in the detail on the top, well, nothing will fall. You will just lose what you've taken off this tower. However, if you find out, or you don't do tests, you don't do reviews inside, or you don't do the integration of the game parts early enough, you may find out that your tower will fall. But going into the loops all over again, you may find out that, well, something isn't working, like we're already 10 years in the pre-production, what's going on, when will we go further? So you need to know when to finish this early production. First is time. For example, creating the project timelines and the first estimates, you might already assume that the pre-production will take, let's say, 2 years. After 2 years, you need to clearly know what game you are doing, have the basis of it, and you just work with what you've done. Because usually, the longer you work on something, the better it will be. So you cannot wait until it's the best, because it will never release. Then you can set markers to the expected quality. Like, those could be the markers of that many features of combat, that many parkour features, or that big map is already built and playable and is not boring from the player's gameplay perspective. You can also prove it by preparing an increment, like the demo that could be shown to the publisher, to the other team in the company if you have many teams, many projects, or just the basic vertical slice. that also could be in higher quality, only the small section, just to represent what is the direction for your game. Also, the metric and design rules are known and proved and set in stone, no one can change it. And the full scope of the game, of course in high level, is defined. And usually after this phase, your game looks like that. You don't see a city here. This should represent some roof structures, some parkour, a playground. And you can recognize it. Not much work was put into arting all of this, unless you're a fan of that blocky, wonderful art. But it doesn't look like the final game. But after you build it, it may turn out that something is wrong. Only when you do this demo, you do this vertical slice, you find out that, oh, well, this game isn't really feeling that well. My first idea was so awesome. I had it all in my mind. But when we started building it from the very small steps, like, it's not this what I imagined. Or I just built something that is already on the market. At that point, you may go back to the beginning, just reset the project. And it happens very often because most of the companies, before finishing the pre-production, don't really announce the game. Some of them do, but let's skip it. Sometimes you should go back to the beginning, especially when it proves that the whole high-level idea was wrong. You are missing the technology that the game should be built on. For example, you want to do a parkour game, but you don't have the technology that will let your player do parkour. Your player can only walk and jump, and you cannot do parkour from that. Maybe you're missing the competences, because the first stages of the project were done with the team of very senior members, but after that, they changed their career, they wanted to move elsewhere. You lost this know-how, and people who knew how to do that, and they didn't have a chance to deliver this knowledge to your team. So unfortunately, you have to cut something or just get a totally new idea. Or maybe too big budget is needed. And although you did your first calculations from the game design document, and it was all in some frames, but after adding more and more details, it turns out that finalizing this will be far too much the budget of your company. However, if already there were many iterations, if you went to that point already 2 times, if maybe sometimes a very small adjustment, just cutting some feature or adding one new, could help with that, or when just cutting something from your project may help with continuing it, and it's totally manageable, then you should not go back to the beginning, but rather optimize what you have and go on, because this is the time to get the right decision. But let's say everything is fine. Your vertical slice was awesome. Your publisher is crying out of joy, looking what kind of project he will release. Then you go to the later stages of the development. And it's like content complete, it's like polishing, so everything's so beautiful. And also, in these days, you don't really release the game and forget about it. You need to do some post-release support just to bring your players closer and keep them focused for longer. And if you've slowly reached this alpha, pre-beta, beta section, your game should be fairly closed. Of course, some details might not be in place. Maybe some storytelling isn't really there. Maybe Easter eggs aren't there and shouldn't be there at that point. But you know the full scope. You know how much time it will take to finalize the game. You have the main path. It is playable. It is fun. And also, you have the designs and the proofs for the optional content. You check that this is not too repeatable or not too hard, and you can continue with that. At that point, any lips that requests big changes and changes in the project should be shut. Because in the other case, this is what we are back to, if you change anything at that point. But let's say everything went right. You are in the later stages of development. And now, when most of the project is done, you have far more borders to introduce your ideas because you already know what is unmovable, what is possible in your game, what fits into your game. So it's much easier to add small adjustments, some quality upgrades, something funny, something very storytelling. You can test the systems if they are complete. You already know what is a bug, what is not. You know the full designs, and now everything must work properly. There is a common vision between the team. It's not like something is in the paper, everyone has something else in their heads, as it was before. Now the game is built, everyone can play it, and everyone knows what it will be in the end. And also, during the later stages of development, you can gather first feedback from the target customer, usually or consumer of your product, usually by some open betas or demos delivered to the public, or maybe silent reviews and sending this to the journalists. And let's say we reached that point of beta and final. So basically, your game is ready to be released. Of course, on the CD, of course, there will be like some patch day 0, patch day 1. As usual, we have internet, we need to use it. And any person who does not know anything about your game, doesn't know the setting, doesn't know the mechanics, can go fully in because they have every information in-game to start. Remember that? This is him now. But in order to have this game released and done and on the market on the given date, you need to deal with changes, because although I said that on multiple levels some things need to be written in stone, the reality isn't always that clear. So how should we deal with that? Saying, as I also said before, saying no to a director never works. What you can do is say no with the proper arguments, prove that the vision is wrong, or just be prepared and inform them. And let's go back that the game is in the pre-beta quality. There's a new part of the quest is needed because you had a scene, you had a dialogue, but in the whole game it doesn't really make sense. So when you did those focus tests, you did the play tests, your player said, oh, I actually don't understand why this person is talking to me and saying me that info. And okay, we forgot to tell the player why do they need this info. So you need to bury deep into the already done in the pre-beta dialogue scene, add these lines. You have to add some custom location for this dialogue because it's a key for the sense of this dialogue, and this is written, implemented, and prepared as a scene. And let's say this is a very, very simple quest cutscene pipeline. And you can see here the pipeline of the location, so of the environment teams. You have the pipeline of the quest, dialogues, story, and storyboards. And you have a pipeline of 3D and concept art. If the points are at the same time, it happens at the same time. The later stages need to be done after the first one are finished. So at that point, if you change anything that is in the existing cutscene and it needs lots of different deliverables to be ready, you have to go all this pipeline to the beginning. And also I'm repeating, this is a very simplified pipeline because usually it is much bigger. And you didn't take that into consideration. Your delayed teams, which come to work at the end of this pipeline, are left with nothing to do. Because what should be done by the lightning artists in the cutscene if the cutscene is not ready? So the lightning artists, if they don't have anything to do, they just sit and count the money they got for sitting. Not all dependencies were verified. Someone didn't know, like someone prepared the concept art for the location, but they didn't know to check it with the Quest team. They already delivered it to the level art and 3D team. The teams prepared the location, but then goes into Quest team and like, no, we said that they are looking at the bones and talking about the bones, but this isn't a museum. They should be at the excavation site. Also, the work may not meet expectations because the way you inform the player about the things is not really in sync with the other cutscenes and the style of dialogue of these characters, or really not fitting into your game, or it is very straightforward because it was done in a very quick way. A lot of already done work is thrown away because that pipeline that was used in preparing the last cutscene just goes to the trash. And after you polish this and don't do the proper review process, it may turn out that after the changes, it's really worse because it was better if player didn't know that. And there was another solution, just solve the mystery later on the cutscene that wasn't already made, and nothing would need to be cut off. So, how to be ready and how to predict what can go wrong? So the first is to have proofs. If you are a normal citizen and you deal with some companies, you usually have all the papers from them on paper. And you should do the same in your company. Of course, you should trust your team members, you should trust your decision makers, but always keep their promises, their ideas, their designs, and the approved stuff on paper. Just to get back to it, everyone can forget. Top to bottom approach. So first think about what you should do, what it is from your perspective as a developer, and what it will be, what do you want to achieve in your player, how it looks in the project, and only then go into details like should this plant be on the right or on the left. Test and verify all the time, all the stages, all the deliverables. It is best if the teams have their embedded QAs who know their pipeline and can check it all the time. If not, then the teams should check their work, but also if the QA is somewhere, then the quality is usually much better. Hush, don't rush. As we talked before with this military outpost, rushing to meet the timelines is sometimes much worse than extending the time. Also, update the timetables with each iteration. If you have the first plan, the basic estimations from your team you did, then go one change, second, third. Suddenly, the teams that should have finished their work in May are in the middle of their work because all of these problems. And you agree because, yeah, this change is nice, yeah, this is a great idea, yeah, it will improve the project. But then it seems you don't have the control over the time, and sometimes the deadlines are unskippable. You should estimate the costs of all actions before starting, because the higher someone is in the ranks of the company, usually they get less knowledge about every single detail in the team's process, in the dependencies between the teams, in the technology and content side, in the design side, and so on. So sometimes some directors or some leaders may have an idea, and the team already knows that, yeah, this is more complicated than it seems from the beginning. So if there is something like that, you should always consult with your specialists, even with the teams, not only the leaders, just to understand what will be the real cost of that. Make sure the whole team knows the game vision, both the directors, the producers, the team, everyone who is working on the project needs to know what the project will be, so there are no decisions that stray your project off the game vision. Also, review all the designs. Sometimes investing more time into paper design is really hard, it's very boring. Why should I do it? I want to work in the engine already. But very many stuff can be already found in the process of just building the blockouts. Also, it's good to track the time of your developers, not for telling them that, oh, you should speed up, you're not the good artist because all your designs and works take too much time, but rather to know that, okay, this kind of tasks have that much time, and you should also develop yourself as a producer to understand the estimates. And all work sources available for everyone. Let's imagine someone gets a task from someone who is on sick leave and cannot continue their task because there are no sources. And always ask the decision maker the reason for the change and tell this reason to the team. Because if anyone needs to iterate on their ideas, they need to understand what of their ideas didn't meet the expectations. And as a producer, should you always agree on changes then? If there are no database reason for change, just someone goes and says, oh, I like it more like that, this is more my taste. Or the new game releases, everyone plays this new game, and you have a great reference that totally doesn't fit your game, but someone has a very big ambition to add it. Or there are new people in your company that have new vision, new ideas, and go on with their own vision. Or the decisions are made by people who don't understand the possibilities, which is basically the producer's stuff to tell that and to explain that, then this is rather a situation where you should not agree on those changes and be the bad guy. And just to tell you how the estimates and timetables and updating the timetables work. First of all, I don't believe in buffers, because buffers is a kind of just raw data that doesn't really occur. And what you need to know is the capabilities of your team and what your team tells you. You are doing allocation. You are doing the design for 2 days, prototype for 3 days, and 5 days of art pass. Your director's schedule is very packed. So you wait with the reviews until the 12th, because you want to have a review and show everything, because this idea is unapproachable when shown only on paper. To fully understand what genius idea you had, you have to perform the full art pass. But after that, it turns out that, well, this is not really what we wanted, and there is something small we need to change in the design. So let's say the iteration will take only 1 day, but it needs to be followed with a new prototype, so another 3 days, and another 5 days of art pass, because the location changed totally. But what you could do, if you got your reviews after the design phase, after the prototype phase, and then after the art pass, you may end up with that kind of the calendar, because sometimes the designs on paper may look pretty fine, okay. After building of the prototype and testing it, oh, well, it doesn't work that way. Then you do an iteration before going into improvement of the quality. You go back, build new prototype, do 5 days of art pass. That way, you are sparing more than a week. The other thing that is very helpful when you are a producer is to have not only your backlog of tasks, but also your backlog of changes. And usually that should be a document that contains what was the topic, what was the task, how much time did it take, how much time you've already lost, what was the result. And the result may be a document, a movie, a screenshot, an art, why it was changed or why it was removed. And also, additionally, you may add who was the assignee who did that and the history of the changes, if there is something else to keep in mind, just to prevent this from happening again or to deal with this better. But we are talking about the gameplay, the features, the art, something that is working perfectly and good looking. Even before, you need to concentrate on it should just work. And for it to just work, you need the game well optimized and you need the good performance. So, to have this, you should communicate with your team. Usually, if you are a producer, you don't have that much time to launch the game daily, to play it, to write some reports, or just check the performance. And you should base on what the QAs and what your team says about the performance of the game. and about the tools they have, because sometimes the game is not optimized because the team don't have or don't know how to use the tools for the optimization. You have to monitor game performance, verify the game vision on the paper level, if it is doable and if this is possible to do, and it's very good to have technical specialists in the teams. But if the big change is decided, because we all faced such situation, what should be done first? You should start the process as soon as possible. Don't wait. If someone decides on a change, usually they won't change their mind if they didn't already. The team, as I told before, should know the reasons. It is important to have a queue of tasks for the people, like let's say this lightning artist who waited for the cutscene. It's good if he has other backlog of lower priorities that he can take over when waiting for the changes. Review and keep track, and test the new approach when you have the first stuff to test. So basically, this is you, this is the producer. If you go to the panic mode after the changes and something is wrong, you should not panic. You should analyze it, you should plan it, add it to the timetables, present it to people above you, and just do your work. And why the changes are needed and they are good? You can resolve basic problems, you can just have better ideas, and the whole game will be much higher quality. Also, the world changes and the game should be ready to release during the time it will release. 3 years before the game's release, you don't know what will be in the world. You don't know what will happen, what will be the drama in the world. Maybe the drama that will occur 3 years later is exactly the same as the narration of your game. Also, not everything can be known from the beginning. Everyone knows about that. And sometimes the redesign of the game is needed because of the performance, because of the game that can be done with your people on your tech, and it's better to think about it up front. And sometimes you can skip these target platforms, you can just drop this old generation just to achieve better quality, concentrating only on the better generation of hardware. And a very short story, how did we introduce these roof settlements in Dying Light 2? If you played it, you may know that the player does some decision, and then they have many different structures spawning on the roofs. This was done when the game was already past the alpha, and this was a very big backlog of changes. This really a bit derailed our plans. However, we had good reasons to do that, because it supports the narration. Those are the great POIs to move around the city, and this is an opportunity to add challenges or micro-quests. So having the list of all the good consequences of that, we had to revisit our timelines, delete everything that might be not so important for the game itself, or not so big priority, just shuffle the priorities, go on with these houses, and they are I think they are one of the most awesome stuff in the game. And back to the game process. If the game is released, does it mean that there will be no more changes? No, that is the moment when you'll know exactly what changes are needed. Because you get the final verdict. Your game goes to the players, and your game is in the hands of those who waited for that and who know exactly what it should do. Now, this is the first time the newcomers do it. People who are not in the industry, maybe don't understand some things, but still have some expectations. You have the media reviews that tell you exactly what should be changed or what should be iterated for the game to be better. And also you can see the player reviews on Metacritic, Steam, Discord, etc. that tell you what are the good and bad sides of your game. At that point, you should collect your players' feedback through multiple different platforms. And you need to pick the right data. You need to find out what are the most recurring problems, not the loudest singles. You have to consolidate the data, because sometimes it's a matter of changing 1 or 2 things to increase the Metascore from 70 to 85. Also, you have to identify your focus groups, and it's good to have the team who does this, or if you're a small company, just make the people understand how to do that, to know what are the expectations of what groups of people, and check mostly the services, the web pages that require the proof that someone has finished the game, because the world is full of trolls and we should not listen to the trolls. So one of the biggest changes we did in Dying Light 2 after the release of the game was adding the firearms. Because the initial design of the game meant that we are doing the modern medieval times. People are using makeshift stuff, there is no technology, and thus we are not using the firearms. There are no pistols. But after the game released, people didn't find it as, okay, great, it's a solid game vision, I appreciate it, but I want shooting, I want shooting, I want shooting. So we had to skip some very important thing of our vision, of our design, of our metrics, and add these pistols, because the players wanted it. So we go to the final question. Can games be done without the changes? Maybe. Maybe there was a project somewhere in the past or will be in the future when some genius will say, okay, this is my vision of the perfect game. You write it down, you have the details from the beginning, and you go on with that. You don't iterate on something, and you end up with the perfect project. But if you have such a situation, just go on, send a lotto or take a part in some contest, because it means you're the luckiest guy or girl ever. But usually the games require iteration, and as a producer, it's not your role to say no, 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 but to understand what is needed, what will be the cost, how to inform the higher-ups, the lower-ups on what will be the consequences and what are the reasons. Just go on with it, because it's your job. And by the way, we are changing Dying Light 2 all the times. There are updates, there are events, there are DLCs. One more DLC is coming. So if you haven't played, do it. If you've played very long ago, then maybe it's time to revisit. And this is it. Thank you very much for being here. And now I think it's the moment for the Q&A.
Yes, of course. If there are any questions, please step up to the microphone in the middle of the room. If everything is clear or any questions arise in the meantime, you can ask Julia after the lecture. She'll answer probably happily to you. Oh, there is one question.
I will have one question for you. Like at one of the latest slides, you said something about the surveys,
yes,
the players. Like I would love to know like your exact procedure. Like is it Discord? Is it Google Docs? Is it any other place that you actually force the players, or encourage players to give reviews? And how you check if they actually played or how long did they play?
So we mostly use the Discord servers, the Techland, the Dying Light Discord. We often verify if the players play the game based on their opinions on what they write. But usually when we hear the same problems that are listed by multiple users, and they are not like absurd problems like, well, I don't like that color, and 1,000 people write, I don't like that color. But really it sounds like it's more of a complicated or understood problem, and it's a common voice. Then we add it to our backlog on the high priority. And also we have a team dedicated to listening to the player, to gathering this feedback, to creation of all the data and presentations about players' feedback based on what we decide what will be the next changes.
Hey, thanks for lecture. I would like to ask about the review pipeline that you showed, because this is very common structure, right? So you have the team review, the lead review, and then the director's review. And what I saw in my history is that this has a potential to lead to a pathology where the whole time box or the whole estimate, or however you want to call it, is eaten, basically, at one of the earlier stages before it reaches the director, it actually already burned the whole budget for it. right? So you have a
Yes.
prototype, no one wants to show it. They're going to like viciously iterate on it up until it's too late. And I just wonder, how you guys deal with that? Because I know everyone
So,
has their own.
What I
their
showed
own way.
here was only an example. It was a very easy draft on how this should look like. And I also said that it needs to represent the team culture and how the team works. Because it's just a book. You never work by the book. You work with people. As for our teams, we mostly follow this pipeline. However, for example, we introduce the team reviews that are joined by the director during a week or twice a week if the director has time. Then the director is as a participant and just looking at the team's work in progress, what they are showing, what are the intentions. And when we introduced this pipeline, it just made all our workloads much shorter because the main points were identified much earlier.
Amazing, thank you.
And
anyone else?
if there are no more questions, I just like to tell you that I need to leave the conference. So if you will have any questions or want to talk about the production, about the games and so on, please go to my LinkedIn profile or to my Facebook profile, Messenger. I try to answer everyone. And have a great conference time. Thank you very much.
Yes.